We begin this hour with President Trump, who has canceled a potentially historic summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. In a letter to Kim, the president cited recent, quote, hostile statements from the North. Hours after the announcement, North Korea said it is willing to resolve issues with the United States whenever and however. Major Garrett has more from the White House.
I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world.
After canceling the summit, President Trump revived tough military rhetoric he believes led North Korea to consider giving up its nuclear weapons.
Our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary.
But Mr. Trump did not rule out future talks.
It's possible that the existing summit could take place or a summit at some later date. Nobody should be anxious. We have to get it right.
The president wrote in a letter to dictator Kim Jong Un, the North's, quote, tremendous anger and open hostility scuttled the summit, a reference to North Korea's statement last night calling Vice President Pence a political dummy and warning of nuclear conflict. The president added, you talk about nuclear capabilities, but ours are so massive and powerful that I pray to God they will never have to be used. Mr. Trump did end by writing, if Kim changes course, please do not hesitate to call me or write.
He expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible.
Less than 3 months ago, the president accepted the surprise invitation from Kim. In a sign of good faith, North Korea released 3 American prisoners.
We want to thank Kim Jong Un, who really was excellent.
But trouble emerged last week when North Korea complained about a joint U.S.-South Korea military exercise and failed to show up in Singapore for a planning meeting.
We've not been able to conduct the preparation between our two teams that would be necessary to have a chance for a successful summit.
Major Garrett joins me now from the White House. Major, what led to this decision, and why did the Trump administration believe now was the right time to walk away?
Well, it's a good question, because there were ample signals even a week ago that this was getting seriously off the rails, and the administration had a chance last week when they sent high-level White House representatives to Singapore for a pre-summit planning meeting, and the North Koreans didn't show up. Pretty strong signal that things were not working out very well. White House could have made a pronouncement back then a week ago. But a senior White House official told us here this afternoon that this White House wanted to give the North Koreans every opportunity, reasonable opportunity, to make this meeting happen. And after more signs from the North Koreans, rhetorical and otherwise, this White House concluded this is just not going to work out. There also, Omar, is something that the White House will not talk about in great detail, but is nevertheless a part of this story, which is the White House itself, the State Department, the National Security Council, to a lesser degree the Pentagon and CIA, but the entire apparatus was trying to get up to speed and ready for an engagement with the North Koreans. It's certainly more difficult to do that when they don't show up, but even if they had showed up, this team was trying to learn very rapidly, trying to assemble itself very quickly for high-stakes, one-on-one negotiations between the two leaders. That may sound easy, but it's definitely not. You need lots of preparation and lots of thorough understanding across all government agencies about what the goals are, what the definitions are, and what will be the process by which you pursue those goals. And a lot of that needs to be thoroughly understood before the leaders can engage at a productive level. They were way behind schedule on that. I know Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, told Congress today we were fully prepared to go. They were going to be ready if the summit occurred. But would it have been wiser or perhaps better for them to have more time? That was becoming a deeper and deeper conclusion within the administration. And so this delaying, and I think this is probably better thought of as a postponement of a summit as opposed to a permanent cancellation, gives them more time for those kinds of preparations.
I want to ask you about some comments that Vice President Pence made. He talked about so-called Libya model. Did that have anything to do with this decision?
Well, certainly it did from the North Korean perspective. And when learning, as I have over many presidential administrations, about what the North Koreans tend to react to and why, you find certain patterns. Not always consistent patterns, but some of them do tend to repeat themselves. One is anything that seems to threaten or suggest in any way, shape, or form that the current regime is in any way jeopardized by the U.S. government. And the Libya model sends a very strong suggestion that it might be. Quickly, what's the Libya model in very thumbnail sketching? Libya had a nuclear weapons program under the Bush administration, George W. Bush. It handed those over. Many, many years later, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator, not only was his regime driven out of power, he was subsequently murdered. That's a regime change. That's a weakened regime that gives up its nuclear weapons and then collapses, and its leader murdered. Okay, that's not exactly the model the North Koreans want to look at or contemplate dealing with a superpower like the United States. Libya is not the only model. Iraq, to a lesser extent. Ukraine is as well. But the North Koreans tend to focus on that. And any time that's suggested, first by the National Security Advisor John Bolton, then by the Vice President, the North Koreans react and react hotly to that. Is that the proximate cause? You can never be sure. But rhetorically, it gave them a hook to say, that's something we're not comfortable with and we're backing away.
What has been the reaction just south of them? What's the reaction from South Korea?
Well, South Korea said it was taken by surprise by this announcement from the White House and by the letter from President Trump. And it was clear here today that there was no advance warning given by this White House to the South Korean government that this letter was coming. There were subsequent conversations, but no heads up, if you will. And there's a constant line we get here from the White House about constant communication between the two governments. That's not holding up to the facts, because not only did South Korea say it was surprised today, just 2 days ago, a top advisor of the South Korean president placed the probability of this summit coming off at 99.9%, even though the White House was clearly already backing away from it. So the South Koreans didn't learn about mounting U.S. frustrations until the face-to-face meeting between President Trump and President Moon on Tuesday. That undercuts these representations we get all the time from the White House about constant and free-flowing communication. There's some gap between what the White House knows and intends to do and what it's communicating to the South Koreans, which will, over time, create a higher level of anxiety, because the South Koreans want this resolved peacefully, number one, and they want all ideas and notions about negotiations to continue, to bring the temperature down on the peninsula, not to ratchet it back up. Today's a day where it ratcheted back up a bit.
You mentioned President Trump reverted to some tough military talk after this announcement, but he also said the summit could happen at a later date. He's almost playing good cop, bad cop. What do we need to be watching for to see how this moves forward?
Well, the administration believes it has the military upper hand. And whether it's true or not, President Trump fundamentally believes his muscular rhetoric and real threats about military action and the engagement with the South Koreans in planned military exercises, but also the deployment of extra military equipment in and around the region, has changed the North Korean calculus. That's what President Trump believes. So he's more than willing to revert to that posture to convince the North Koreans to come back to the table or to engage in a more direct and responsive way to efforts to prepare for a summit. So the White House will wait and see what the North Koreans do. The early soundings from North Korean representatives do not appear to be hostile. They appear to be somewhat conciliatory. So there's still some room to re-engage on the summit, but June 12th appears to be beyond repair at this stage.
Diplomatic theater with, of course, high drama and a lot of layers to peel back there. Thank you very much, Major Garrett at the White House.
Sure.